We are live, back at it again in Orange City, Orlando, Florida, playing 1-2 no limit. I am on the cutoff with 325 effective. There with one straddle on the button and 2 limps. I'm going to open up here a little bit larger. I'm going to pick a sizing of 35, and we do see the button call, and we do see everyone else fold. So that feels like a good sizing to me. I want to go heads up in these situations. With the flop coming 8 deuce deuce, this is pretty good for me. I don't see a lot of 2s or 8s in his range. It is possible that he has ace deuce, but we're going to have to bet about half pot to find out. And when the button sees that, he pretty much immediately folds, and I take down a nice healthy $100 pot. The theme of this video is going to be how many hands I can get to fold without seeing a showdown. Stick around to find out. Next notable hand, I'm under the gun with about 350 effective. I look down to queen, jack of diamond, and I'm going to open up to about 10, which is a standard sizing here at 1-2. I've found that a lot of times when you open at 3 or 4x the big blind, like $6 or $8, you just don't get a lot of folds. You tend to end up with like 6 players, 7 players, 8 players, multi-way. And so when we see the last player to act jam for 200, this is a pretty pure fold for me. I would have loved to see a flop, especially for the high hand promotions they run here at the room, but I just can't continue for my entire stack with queen jack. I'd be dominated against aces, kings, or any ace x. This is a pretty pure fold with only $10 risked. Next up, we're in a very similar situation in middle position with 5-3 of clubs. I open for 10 again, as is my standard bet. There are 2 calls, and so the pot is $33. And then the cutoff decides to go all in for $100. And again, this is just a pretty immediate and easy fold. There's really not a lot to think about here, but this is the kind of play that you see at 1-2, and so you have to know to avoid it. Finally, we wake up to king, queen offsuit under the gun. I'm about 340 effective. I'm opening for 10 here, as is my normal size. Next act calls, and so we are heads up to the flop, which brings a 10-6-3, all rainbow. So in this spot, there's only about $19 in the pot. I kind of need to see if my opponent's got a much stronger hand, so I'm going to bet 15. I think in retrospect, this sizing is a little bit too large because I think he would be incentivized to call with ace-10 here and not 3-bet. As it is, he just calls. The turn is a 4 of clubs, and so now I think I am thinking that he is capped, so I go ahead and put in the big boy overbet raise here. It is only a $2 overbet, but it does get the job done. Do me a favor, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and leave me a comment. Thank you. Next up, a little bit later in the session, we are on the big blind, and we have about 250 effective. I look down to pocket 7s of the red variety. There is a straddle on and the small blind called, so I'm going to open here, and I'm going to open for about 20, which is a little bit on the small side because I'm so early to act, and this is kind of the bottom end of my open range. There are 2 calls, one from the cutoff and the small blind. So we go 3 ways to a flop, which brings ace, king, 10, rainbow. Now this flop is actually pretty good for my range. So when it checks to me, I'm going to c-bet for 25. Now the cutoff thinks for a few seconds and folds, and the small blind snap folds, so I get this one through and I take down a healthy pot. If you've been keeping track, that makes 3 wins without showdown. Next notable hand, I've taken a few punches, I've taken a few splashes, I'm a little bit shorter stacked, but I look down to ace-10 offsuit in the button. It has limped to me, so I'm going to open for 15 now, which is a little bit larger because I'm in later position and there's some limps in front. The small blind calls, and when it gets to the middle position player, he jams for 45 effective. So it folds over to me, and I think in this spot, this is like a 50-50. You know, there is still one player left to act behind, but he hasn't shown a lot of interest other than just flat calling. So I am going to stick in the call here, and the small blind surprisingly calls as well. So we are 3 ways off to the flop, and I have some side action left with the small blind. So the flop comes 6-8-3 with 2 spades, and this is relatively good for me given that I don't see this board interacting much with the small blind, so I am going to try to bet him out of the pot. I put in a $50 bet, and he does decide to fold, so we are clean going to a turn, which is a 6, and a river, which is a 3. So at this point,
Ace high. got sixes straights with an ace.
6-8 diamond.
I can't believe I got to scoop this with just ace high, given that the little old lady folded her 6-8 of diamonds pre-flop, so thank you. Next up, we are in middle position with Queen 10 of clubs. This is definitely a hand I'm going to open, so I raise to 10, and surprisingly the cutoff behind me raises to 27. That's a little bit of a min click, so what's he up to? It folds back around to me, and I think this is a pretty clean call. I definitely don't want to 3-bet because I have a little bit of equity here, especially with a high hand promotion in the room, so we are heads up off to the flop, which brings 10-8-6, 1 heart. So this is an interesting spot. I'm going to check my top pair over to him and see if he's going to choose a big, a medium, a small sizing, or if he's going to check back. He does bet $50, and I think this is on the larger size. This is about a pot size bet, but I definitely am not ready to let go of my hand yet with a club backdoor. I do turn a 10, so now we're in really good shape. I check and he immediately checks back. There's a 3 of hearts on the river and I check, he checks, and we are at showdown.
Thought he'd take the bait. Thought he'd take the bait.
Yeah, so in retrospect, I think it was pretty clear that I should have just bet the river. Next notable hand, I am in the hijack. I look down to Queen 8 of spades. I'm going to open to $10, which is my standard open. The cutoff calls and the button calls, so we are 3 ways to the flop. Now in a multi-way pot, with a hand as weak as this, I have to be a little bit careful. The flop does come Jack 7 of clubs with a 5 of spades. I check and it immediately checks through. We turn the 10 of spades, so this is getting better for me. I'm going to go ahead and lead out for 15. The cutoff calls and the button folds, so we are off to the river. I have a queen of clubs, and that is pretty good for top pair, but pretty bad if there are any straight draws out there. I do block a lot of the straights with the 8, so I go ahead and put in a bet of 30, and he folds. If you've been paying attention, that's my 4th win without showdown. If you've made it this far, please leave me a comment and tell me something I can do better on the next video. I love getting your feedback. Thank you. The next interesting hand in the session, I'm in the hijack and I have King Jack offsuit. I'm going to open to 10, and as we get around, we see that the cutoff calls, so we are heads up to the flop, and we get a Jack 7 deuce. Look at that sweet baby there. Look at that flop. So we go to around 12, which is about half pot. We just want to see if our opponent is capped or uncapped here going into this turn. He does put in the call, and the turn is the 3 of hearts, which is not really interacting with this board at all. So given that I have top pair and top kicker, I think I can size up pretty comfortably here. I'm going to go ahead and put in a bet of $50, and he snap folds. He turbo folds. So that is 5 wins without showdown. Next hand in the session, we're in the small blind. It limps around to me, and I look down to a Queen Jack offsuit. At this point, I think a raise is warranted, and I'm going to have to size up given that I'm in the worst position in poker, and there's quite a few people who have limped but not raised, so we go to 20. The big blind flat calls, and it folds back around. And usually when the big blind flat calls with this many players behind, it's going to put a bit of a cap. I'm kind of thinking that he might have some strong overcards. He might have like ace jack. He might have like king jack offsuit, and he just doesn't want to see a lot of action. So he does put in the call. It folds back to me, and we are off to the flop, which is 9-8-7. I check, and he checks behind. So at this turn, I think I'm going to start putting together a bluff. I have a lot of kings in my range. He probably doesn't, maybe at this point. So I put in a bet of $20, and he does call, and the river brings 6. So there's a 4-line to a straight out there, and I think I just have to check and give up.
You practiced 6. Yeah. I couldn't bluff there.
Is that good enough?
I couldn't bluff.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Bad river for a bluff there.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
I think that we did 7.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for me.
Way to play defense. Way to play defense.
3.3.
It's like, this is such a shitty river. I can't run a bluff there. I needed a clean river to run a bluff.
Now this is a weird hand. I don't know if I misplayed this. I don't know if I played it perfectly. It's such an unusual spot, but I am on the button with 10-6 suited, and it limps to me, so I'm going to go ahead and limp very wide here. We are 6 ways to a flop, which comes 6, 7, 4. So I have middle pair. Not that good on this board. I mean, this is a very straighted board, so when it checks to me, I'm going to check back. The turn is a 10 of spades, so all of a sudden I have top 2 pair. What? I have to double check my cards. So when the big blind checks and the cutoff bets $20, I don't know. I guess I'll call and see what happens on the river. So I call, and we are 3 ways to the river. I think the big blind called as well. So the river brings an ace of spades. Now this is bad for me. This is pretty bad. If somebody had ace 7, ace 4, if they had 2 spades, everything got there. Everything got there. A lot of straights get there. 9-8 gets there on the turn. 5-3 was already there. So when it checks to the cutoff and the cutoff bets, I think I just need to fold. Now moving along in the session, I've been treading water for quite a while, but the banter is good, the atmosphere is good, the food at the card room is good, the high hand promotions are good, and I look down to a good double A battery in the hijack. I've got the aces, so with the button straddle, the small blind and the big blind calling, I'm going to be raising it up, and I'm going to be raising it up quite fat with a $30 raise. The button does put in the call, and everyone else gets out of the way. So we are heads up to a flop, and I have the best hand in poker. The flop comes Jack 9 deuce. Hey, Mark Goon, are you listening? This is your flop. When he checks to me, I'm going to make a bet, and I'm going to bet about half pot, and the villain folds, and I take it down.
Run is good. Aces. Someone did their homework last night.
Sometimes I have.
As we come into the last hand of the session, I am on the big blind with ace jack of clubs. Under the gun had straddled, and there were 5 limps to me, so I have to raise. This is mandatory. I make it 30 to go. I probably could have made it bigger. I probably could have bet 50. I probably should have bet 100. I don't know. Well, under the gun calls, and the low jack calls, and everybody else folds. So we are going to be 3 ways to a flop, which is a little bit less than ideal, given that I'm out of position, given that this is a pretty bloated pot, and given that I do only have ace high here. I better get a really good flop, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble. The flop does come down, ace from space, 10 of clubs, and 6 of hearts. So hey, this is great. I'm gonna bet again. I can't stop myself. I bet $35. Under the gun thinks it over and folds, and then it goes to the low jack, who, after mulling it over for a minute or two, does decide to call. So we are now heads up to the turn. It is a 4 of spades. What a blank. What a super great blank for me. So with the pot being $167, I think there's only one move in poker, and that is all in. I'm about 175 effective, and he doesn't take too long before he decides to give up and fold. So have you been counting how many times did I win without showdown? If you comment the correct number of wins without showdown, I will give you one tiny little high five. All right, that's it. Bye.